The night had fallen quietly over the small village, but inside the dimly lit room, Diep felt the world collapsing around her. She had come to meet James because something in her heart told her he was hiding a storm behind his tired eyes. For days he had avoided her questions, giving her only half smiles and promises that everything would be fine. But tonight, for the first time, he did not try to pretend. "Diep, there's something you need to know," he said, his voice low, as if the words themselves were heavy enough to crush him. She felt a chill run down her spine. James rarely trembled, yet his hands were shaking. He took a breath, slow, broken, and began speaking about the betrayal inside his own family, about his father's crimes that he had been forced to cover, about John, the man who had been hunting him, the one who had tried to destroy his company, his reputation, and his life. And finally, about the reason he disappeared, forced to hide in the shadows just to protect her. Every word cut deeper than the last. Diep stood there frozen, her lips parted in disbelief. She had imagined a dozen possibilities, but nothing close to the nightmare unfolding in front of her. The man she loved had survived because he ran, because he fought alone, because he didn't want her to become a target. "So, when you left," her voice cracked. James looked at her with eyes full of pain. "I thought they would go after you next. I couldn't risk that, Diep. I ran because staying meant losing you." The weight of his confession struck her suddenly, violently. Tears welled up before she could stop them. She covered her mouth with her trembling hand, but the sob burst out anyway, raw, helpless, heartbreaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered through her tears. "Why did you carry all that alone?" James lowered his head. "Because if you knew, you would have stayed. And if you stayed, they would have hurt you. They were never after me, Diep. You were the one they wanted to hurt." Her knees weakened, her heart shattered. She could barely breathe through the storm inside her chest. For the first time, she understood the darkness hidden behind his silence. Yet even in her heartbreak, one question echoed louder than fear. If she stayed, would it destroy both of them? The room felt unbearably small, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on Diep, forcing her to confront a truth far heavier than anything she had imagined. James watched her quietly, his breath unsteady, his shoulders trembling like a man awaiting his own sentence. "Diep, say something," he whispered. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, though new ones kept falling. "I don't even know what to say, James. Everything you told me, it's too much." "I know." His voice was fragile, a soft crack in the darkness. "I never wanted to drag you into this world, but you were already pulled in the moment I loved you." Diep looked up, stunned. He had said it so simply, yet it landed with the force of 1,000 storms. Love. That was the very thing he tried to hide, and the very thing that had made her suffer. "You should have trusted me. You should have let me stand beside you." James shook his head. "If I did, you would be in danger right now, Diep. They threatened you. They followed you. Even your house was not safe. I couldn't risk losing you, not because of my family's sins." Silence enveloped them for a long moment. Outside, the wind rustled the banana leaves she had grown behind her house, simple, peaceful things that never knew the cruelty of the world James lived in. Finally, Diep stepped closer. Her hand reached out almost instinctively, brushing against his arm. He flinched. He wasn't expecting kindness. "James," she said softly, "you went through all of that alone, running, hiding, fighting, while still trying to protect me. Do Do you know how painful it is to hear that?" His eyes darkened, guilt spreading across his face like a shadow. "If I could take it all back, I would. If I could erase every tear you cried because of me, I would. But Diep, I'm scared. If I keep you close, I might drag you into something you can't escape from. And if you push me away, you'll break me in a different way." He closed his eyes, breathing shakily. "Diep, I don't deserve you." She shook her head firmly, even through her tears. "This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what we choose. And I choose you, James. But," she hesitated, "I need to know one thing before I stand beside you." James opened his eyes, afraid, hopeful, desperate. "What is it?" he asked. Diep took a deep, trembling breath. "Will you let me face your darkness with you, or will you keep fighting alone?" James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away, his hand gripping the edge of the wooden table as if holding himself upright required effort. The dim light in the small room cast long shadows, making him look older, defeated, stripped of all the confidence he once wore so easily as a CEO. "Diep," he finally said, voice hoarse, "my darkness isn't something you can just walk through. It's not a storm that passes. It's something that destroys everything close to it." She stepped behind him, her heartbeat loud in her chest. "Then why are you still standing in it alone?" "Because my father put me there." James let out a bitter laugh, one without humor. "Do you know what it feels like to realize the man you respected your whole life is the same man trying to control, manipulate, and break you?" Diep reached for his arm, gently turning him so he faced her. His eyes, filled with exhaustion and something far more fragile, met hers. "What did he do to you?" she whispered. James swallowed hard. "He didn't just stop me from seeing you. He didn't just threaten you. He locked me abroad, Diep. He hired men to keep me there. I had to run, hide, escape. I almost died on that border road." Her breath hitched. "James!" "And when I finally came back, I found out he was planning to take everything, my company, my future, my own choices, all because he thought I wasn't the son he wanted." Diep's hands trembled as she lifted them to cradle his face. His eyes, filled with exhaustion and something far more fragile, met hers. How could someone do that to their own child? "Because to him," James whispered, leaning into her touch without realizing it, "I'm not a son. I'm an investment, a piece on a chessboard, and loving you made me a liability." Tears filled her eyes again, not out of fear this time, but out of heartbreak for the man standing in front of her. "You've been hurting for so long, and you thought keeping all this from me would protect you, but it only made you suffer alone." "I'd do it again," he replied instantly, eyes burning, "if it meant keeping you safe." She shook her head. "No, James, that's not love. That's sacrifice. And sacrifice without trust only destroys both people." He took her hands, his grip gentle yet desperate. What do you want me to do, Diep?" "I want you," she said slowly, "to stop carrying the weight of everything alone. Let me help. Let me stay. Let me choose to be part of your fight." His breath caught, "And if staying with me puts your life in danger?" he asked. Diep didn't flinch. "Then I'll face that danger with you." In that moment, James realized something. She wasn't afraid of his darkness. She was afraid of losing him to it. For a long moment, silence wrapped around them, fragile, trembling, but warm. James stared at Diep, as if trying to decide whether her words were a miracle or a danger he didn't deserve. Outside, the night wind brushed against the wooden walls, sounding like a distant reminder that the world beyond this tiny room was still hunting him, and now her too. "Diep," he finally whispered, "if you stay beside me, you're choosing a life that might never be peaceful again." She smiled tearfully, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I never asked for peaceful. I asked for you." His chest tightened painfully. No one had ever said something like that to him. Not his family, not his colleagues, not the world that watched him rise and fall. It felt like someone had reached into the emptiest part of him and placed a trembling flame inside. "But you deserve someone whose life isn't falling apart," he murmured, voice cracking. "Someone whose father isn't trying to destroy him, someone who can take care of you, protect you." Diep stepped closer and took his hands firmly. "James, listen to me." Her tone was gentle but unwavering. "Love isn't about choosing the easiest path. It's choosing the person you want to walk that difficult path with." He swallowed hard, his eyes burning. "You think I'm strong, but Diep, I'm exhausted. I'm fighting a war with my own father. I'm gathering evidence to expose him. I'm risking everything, my freedom, my name, my company. Some days I wake up and I don't even know if I'll survive to see the next. That's why you can't go through it alone. If the truth destroyed you, what would be left for me? I would rather face danger by your side than live safely without you." He looked at her, really looked at her, as if searching for fear, doubt, regret. There was none, only love and courage. Slowly, painfully, something in him softened, like ice melting after a long winter. "Diep," his voice broke, "I don't know what will happen after I reveal everything. I don't know if I lose the James you know. I don't know if I'll become someone else." She squeezed his hands. "Then let me be there to remind you who you are." In that moment, James stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest as if she were the only solid thing left in his world. She held him just as tightly, her cheek pressed to his heartbeat. "I'm here," she whispered. "No matter what comes next, I'm here." James closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he finally believed her. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the fear and scars, hope flickered back to life. Moral of the story. In the end, the greatest truth James and Diep discovered was that love is not measured by how perfect life is, but by how willing two people are to stay when everything falls apart. We often think strength means fighting alone, hiding our fears, or pretending we don't need anyone. But real strength comes from allowing someone to stand beside us, even when we feel broken, ashamed, or unworthy. Diep's choice to remain by James's side reminds us that loyalty is not blind, it is brave. It is the decision to believe in a person's goodness even when the world questions it. And James's vulnerability shows that opening one's heart is not weakness, but the first step toward healing. Love doesn't erase hardship, betrayal, or pain, but it gives us the courage to face them with a steadier, stronger spirit. Sometimes, the greatest battles in life are not won by power or revenge, but by trust, forgiveness, and the quiet but unshakable strength of two hearts choosing each other, again and again, even in the darkest moments.